They never told you what the workers found beneath London in 1940. Not because the records were lost in the bombing, but because someone made sure they disappeared before the dust had even settled. There is a photograph, taken somewhere beneath the streets of London during the worst year of the Blitz. The men inside it are wearing suits, not uniforms, not helmets. They are not rescue workers. They are not engineers. And the expressions on their faces are not the expressions of men who have just survived a bombing raid. They are the expressions of men who have just seen something they already knew was there. That photograph has been sitting in a private archive in Gloucestershire for over 80 years, and the story behind it is the one they never finished telling you. September 7th, 1940. The German Luftwaffe has just launched its first coordinated assault on London. Fires are burning across the East End. Civil defence wardens are moving through rubble that hours earlier was someone's street, someone's front door, someone's ordinary life. Arthur Pembridge was one of those wardens, 26 years old, Southwark district, quiet man, methodical. The kind of person you trusted to file a report correctly. That night, the ground swallowed him. He fell perhaps 8 feet. When he landed and his torchlight cut through the dark, he later described a feeling he struggled his whole life to put into words. Not fear, exactly. Something older than fear. He was looking at a corridor, brick-lined, deliberately constructed, running in both directions farther than his light could reach. The walls carried markings, not graffiti, not Victorian pipe notation. Something placed there with a precision and intention that the rubble above it had no right to be hiding. Pembridge climbed out. He filed his report carefully, the way he always did. Within 72 hours, that report was gone. Removed from the Civil Defence Registry. In its place, a single typed line. Subsidence event. No further action required. 3 weeks later, Arthur Pembridge was transferred to Bristol. He never discussed what he saw that night. Not with colleagues, not with friends. Not once in the 41 years he lived after the war did he raise it publicly, but he wrote it down. Every detail. In a private notebook his daughter found hidden beneath her childhood floorboards in the year 2000, pressed so deep into the wood it had been there since before she was born. And what those pages contained was not just the story of one man falling through the wrong piece of ground on the wrong night. It was the first thread of something that once pulled, unraveled everything. Here is what you need to understand about the Blitz. Between September 1940 and May 1941, over 43,000 tons of high explosives fell on Britain. London took the heaviest share. Entire neighbourhoods were erased. The foundations of a city inhabited continuously for 2,000 years were torn open in ways they had never been torn open before. And that was the problem nobody spoke about publicly. Because when you tear open the foundations of a 2,000-year-old city, you sometimes expose things buried for reasons that appear in no public record. Things that certain people in certain positions had spent decades managing in silence. The excavation teams working through bombed areas were not all doing the same job. A specific, quietly organized subset, moving through sites after rescue workers had left, working in the hours before dawn, were conducting something else entirely. A survey, a cataloguing operation, run not through any publicly named ministry, but through a department so deliberately obscure it appeared in no published wartime government structure. It was called the Subsurface Integrity Commission, and it had been running since 1887. That date is not arbitrary. The late Victorian period was when London first excavated itself at serious depth. The Metropolitan Railway, the Bazalgette sewer network, the embankment. For the first time in modern history, men dug systematically beneath a city that had stood for 2 millennia. And what they kept encountering made the foreman nervous. Chambers where only clay should have been, passageways predating every known construction phase, stonework that matched nothing in the architectural record of the island. In 1883, during construction of what would become the Circle Line near Aldgate, workers broke through a wall and found a room 40 feet square, 12-foot ceiling, lined in pale stone that private analysis determined had come from no quarry within 300 miles of London. The room was empty, but it had been sealed from the outside, deliberately, carefully, as though whoever built it had walked out, closed it behind them, and expected silence for a very long time. The workers were paid and relocated. The construction log was amended to read, "Void encountered, filled, no structural impact." A pattern was established, not for the first time, but for the first time with real institutional machinery behind it, because informal suppression was no longer sufficient. What was needed was a system. The Commission became that system. By 1940, it had been operating for 53 years. It had files, networks, and procedures embedded across the civil defence apparatus and the Ministry of Works. It had been waiting, with the patient indifference of bureaucracy, for exactly what the Blitz provided: access. The most significant discovery of those excavations was made in late October 1940 beneath the collapsed warehouses of Bermondsey. At roughly 45 feet of depth, past Victorian brick, medieval debris and Roman period deposits, the Commission's team broke into a space that should not have existed at any depth beneath any city, not a corridor, a room. With a floor levelled to a precision the Commission's own surveyors initially refused to classify as artificial. 60 feet by 80 feet, the vaulted ceiling, though partially destroyed by the bombing above, displayed a geometry that the Commission's lead surveyor, a man named George Holstock, whose name appears in no public record, described in his filed report as consistent with an advanced understanding of structural load distribution. 3 walls bore markings, systematic, spatial, covering every inch of surface, from floor to ceiling. Those markings were photographed and classified the same day, stored in a facility whose location was never recorded in any document that has since entered the public domain. But history always produces the one person who refuses to simply walk away. Before the Commission sealed the site, 3 people who were not their personnel had already entered that room. 2 were rescue workers who found it by accident. The third was a young woman named Miriam Ashworth, a volunteer surveyor from King's College, London, who had reached the site 40 minutes before the Commission's team arrived. She spent 2 hours inside. When Commission men came to escort her out, she cooperated without argument. She was calm, she was polite, and pressed against the lining of her coat were the pencil sketches she had made of every marking on every wall within reach. Her own account, written privately years later, described her hand shaking so badly she could barely keep the pencil moving. She sketched anyway, because she understood within those 2 hours that she was looking at something the world was not supposed to see, and she had already decided she would not let it disappear entirely. She hid the sketches and said nothing. Miriam Ashworth lived until 1997. She spent 46 years publishing careful academic papers on pre-Roman symbolic systems, respected, cited, never sensational. She never published the sketches directly. She encoded them across 17 papers between 1951 and 1989, fragmenting the information through footnotes and appendices like a woman leaving a trail through a dark forest, trusting that the right person would eventually reach the end of it. In 2019, a collaborative group working across universities in Edinburgh, Bristol, and Amsterdam completed the full reconstruction of what she had hidden across 4 decades of scholarship. Their conclusion, stated in the most careful language they could hold themselves to, was this: the markings in the Bermondsey room represented a systematic notation system of unknown origin, consistent with the organizational requirements of a complex, hierarchically structured society. Unknown origin. At a depth whose implied age the accepted timeline of human civilization in Britain has no framework to absorb. And now, the detail that reframes every single thing that came before it. The men in that photograph were not discovering something. They were confirming something. The Commission had known, had documented, sealed, and quietly verified across 53 years of accumulated evidence that what lay beneath London was not a geological accident. The Blitz did not reveal a secret. It made the secret impossible to continue managing at the scale it had always been managed. What the bombs provided was not revelation. It was scale. The suppression that followed was not maintained by villains. That is the part that should disturb you most. It was maintained by administrators, by men following procedures built by men before them, who were following procedures built by men before them. Systems do not require malice to continue. They require only inertia, and institutional inertia, once established, is essentially infinite. Arthur Pembridge wrote one sentence in his notebook the night before his transfer to Bristol. His daughter found it pressed between the final pages, unelaborated, unexplained, as though he had written it and decided. Nothing more needed saying. The ground remembers what the city has forgotten, and the city will spend any price to keep it that way. He was right. Somewhere in Gloucestershire, in a folder inside a private archive, a photograph waits in silence. Men in suits, a chamber at impossible depth. Expressions carrying no shock, no wonder, no disbelief, only recognition.